Peg. I'm kidding, dear. On the other end of the line was the unmistakable New York accent belonging to the 45th President of the United States. He said he had just woken up from a dream that he didn't want to tell me about, but he remembered me and my articles fondly and offered me the position of presidential librarian and archivist, on the condition that I could come to Washington, D.C. immediately and start assembling the documents that would comprise this volume, the first ever presidential pocket library, which the president insisted we publish before the opening of the Obama Presidential Library in Chicago. Before the bacon was even cold, I had given Peg a kiss and hopped the first flight to our nation's capital, where I checked into a hotel and made fast friends with the bartenders at the Capitol Grill, and that's Capital with an A. The next morning, I was asleep in my clothes in my room at the Hilton Garden Inn when my phone rang at 9 o'clock on the dot. Expecting to hear the robotic voice of the automatic wake-up call, I gave my best Frank Nelson greeting to what turned out to be an unamused man from the Secret Service. He told me that they weren't going to wait for the results of my background check so I could swing by the White House whenever. As it turns out, the FBI found out that some of the president's best guys had a few lovers' quarrels in their past, so the administration elected to just suspend background checks for everyone. So I devoured some room service eggs, steamed my best polo, and walked 8th Street to Lafayette Square. There it was, like a postcard brought to life. The White House. I walked straight up to the gate, where a stray cat was nursing its kittens by the empty security booth. A man with dreadlocks was scaling the fence. He waved to me from the parapet, then dropped to the ground and elbowed the gate open for me before running to the rose garden to make the nightly news. I entered gingerly and made my way up the path. Near the west wing, I took a moment to appreciate the history of the sacred ground on which I was standing, and watch the Secret Service tackle that protester. Some of these guys have a future in the NFL. I heard a creaking sound from behind some bushes, and saw a man in a chef's hat light up a cigarette next to an open screen door. I waved hello. "Mind if I come in this way?" I asked. "Sure," he replied with a profanity. "Be my guest." So in I went through the West Wing kitchen, where rows of gourmet chefs were pounding burger patties and sliding racks of them into the freezer. I proceeded to the corridor, which was empty except for a weeping woman in a business skirt, heels clicking down the hallway. I saw another Secret Service agent. I told him I was there to see the president. He shrugged and gestured down the hall. I smelled liquor on his breath, so I made a note to circle back with him later on. As I walked through the empty office bullpens, I heard a man screaming at the top of his lungs. A shrill, scratchy gorilla scream from a man who has had practice. I tiptoed to the door and peeked my head through, holding my breath. This was my first glimpse of the Oval Office, and of the tilted mass of the 45th President of the United States, unloading a day's worth of anger on a cowering Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, and Sean Spicer. As they shuffled out of the room, I stepped in, and the tone changed instantly. The president sat back in his chair and smiled. "Kelsey," he said, "I heard you said some very nice things about my golf courses." It was like a storm cloud blew out of the room. It felt like it was just the two of us in the whole entire world. I bathed in the warmth and charisma that I remembered from our previous encounters, now amplified by the trappings of power. Being in a room with Donald Trump is like meeting the uncle you always dreamed of having. We quickly agreed on some ground rules. The archive must be tremendous. I must be the kind of guy he can count on. And don't tell Melania. Tell her what? I don't know. But I agreed to all three. Now for some full disclosure. Don't worry, I'll keep my pants on. I've been called many things in my life, including some choice four-letter words, but nobody has ever said I was a political kind of guy. My wife, Peg, is a lifelong Democrat. She volunteered for Mondale when she was 29, and she's been 29 ever since. I consider myself an independent, though I usually vote Republican, so I can afford to have a wife. So if you hadn't guessed already, I did support President Trump in 2016. I was sick of how all the other candidates from both parties had forgotten about people like me, the guys and gals who work hard for their families, and still think this country is actually pretty great. I don't want to feel bad for having a nice car and a nice house in a nice neighborhood. If having a good life makes me the problem, I'm not sure how 8 more years of the Clinton cabal was going to be the solution. But let me get off my soapbox here. This book draws from both public and private documents, transcripts of conversations in person and